Good morning. Well, thank God it's Friday. Today is January 16, 2025, the last day of the working week in the month of January. My name is Winifred Weber, your host on the program. Today is January 16, 2025. Without wasting much time, let's head up to our menu where we have topping the list Nigeria's most influential newspaper, Leadership. Leadership Friday's leading story today says petrol demand surged to 63.7 million liters per day in December, coming from Regulator. Petrol demand surged to 63.7 million liters per day in December, Regulator. Imports dropped to 42.2 million liters per day from 52.1 million liters per day. Of course, there's marked improvement in the reduction of petrol imports. Congratulations to Nigeria. Nigeria joined the rest of the world to celebrate the Armed Forces Day remembrance yesterday. And of course, we have the pictures of Vice President Kashim Shettima laying the wreath during the 2026 grand finale of 2026 Armed Forces Celebrations and Remembrance Day at National Arcade, Abuja, yesterday. We also have pictures from across the country, the High Commissioner of Cameroon to Nigeria, also a Minister of Defense, General Christopher Musa, laying the wreath during the Armed Forces Celebrations Day. And we also have the picture of the Oyo State Governor, Seyi Makinde, laying the wreath during the 2026 Armed Forces Celebrations and Remembrance Day at Lekon Salami Stadium, Adamasingba, Ibadan, yesterday. These are pictures gracing the cover of Leadership, and also as well as some papers we have on our lineup this Friday. Beneath those pictures, Atiku Son declared support for Tinubu joins APC. It's a leading story in all the papers today, national papers. That is, and that's what is trending. However, the former VP said there is no border. It's one of those things. Sanusi admitted to study law at Kano University. 60 years without Sardauna, we rebuild North, ACF, Northern Elders, Orders. Wow. That story is on page 7 of Leadership Friday. 60 years without Sardauna, we rebuild North, ACF, Northern Elders, Orders. Wow. Nigeria records 15.15% inflation rate in December. And that takes us to just the story beneath the masthead of Leadership Friday, countdown to Leadership Conference and Award Ceremony coming up next month, February. For its inclusive and reconciliatory leadership that unites people across divides in Cardinal State, and for its people-centered leadership that has transformed Ekiti State, Senator Basani and Biodun Abayomi Oyebanji are governors of the year 2025. The story continues on page 8 of Leadership Friday. From the cover of Leadership Friday, we move to page 3, where we have our stand. Today's stand is on a case for special courts for corruption trials. A case for special courts for corruption trials. Today's stand in Leadership. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, Chairman Olukoyede, has identified what many Nigerians already know. Politically exposed persons have turned the criminal justice system into a playground. They exploit procedural loopholes, secure endless adjournments, and drag cases until public memory fades and prosecutors lose time. Justice becomes a mirage, anti-corruption efforts lose credibility, and the message to aspiring looters remains clear, still big enough, and you can lawyer your way to freedom. These are excerpts in today's stand in Leadership, a case for special courts for corruption trials. Now let's take the stand inside our stand. Nigeria doesn't lack anti-corruption laws or investigative capacity. What is missing is judicial infrastructure designed to convert investigations into convictions before defendants deploy the arsenal of delay tactics. The regular courts have too many competing demands and insufficient specialization to fill this gap. Corruption isn't just stealing money, it's killing Nigerians through collapsed healthcare systems, failed infrastructure, and destroyed opportunities. Special corruption courts won't eliminate corruption overnight, but they will signal that the justice system is finally serious about holding the powerful accountable and demonstrate to ordinary Nigerians that the law can actually touch those who currently operate above it. Today stand in leadership, a case for special courts for corruption cases. We are not done yet with leadership. Let's go to the back page of the paper where we have conversation with Azu. Today's conversation is on a British war journalist account of how January 15 changed Nigeria. A British war journalist account of how January 15 changed Nigeria. Today's conversation with Azu is here. Azu is the editor-in-chief and senior vice chairman of Leadership Media Group. We'll take a quote from his conversation. If the January boys thought that striking on January 15 was a patriotic duty to save Nigeria from the 10%ers, the corrupt politicians and ethnic chauvinists, their action only unleashed the worst of the demons they set out to defeat. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into decisive months, I wonder if the January boys in quote might have acted differently if as they said, George said, they knew that the country they were trying to save would be far worse than anything they might have imagined on the morning of January 15. Aside from conversation with Azu on a British war journalist account of how January 15 changed Nigeria. Before we leave the back page where the conversation is, let's visit Ghana Must Go. On the news, we'll bomb bandits in Niger Forest within 2 months, coming from the governor, Bago, and Ghana Must Go is asking the governor, they need advance notice. You don't need to let them know. It's on that note to conclude review of Leadership Friday, Nigeria's foremost Friday newspaper. This January 16, 2025. For more, don't forget to log into the website of Leadership, www.leadership.ng. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup this Friday, and that is Daily Sun, talking about the Armed Forces Remembrance Day celebration. Tinubu says, I won't forget slain soldiers, leading on today's Daily Sun newspaper. I won't forget slain soldiers, Tinubu, leading story today on Daily Sun. As Shetima Akpabioda's honor fallen heroes, governors emphasized lessons from scars of Nigerians' history to learn from 1966 coup civil war. ADC forced Tinubu's absence at Armed Forces Remembrance Day celebration. Court faces March 16 for DSS to open case against 2 Ansaru commanders. Dangote Cement targets 90 million tons, splashes 15 billion naira on distributors. Alafin absent at Makinde as Makinde inaugurates Olubadan as chairman Oyo State Council of Obas. Alafin absent as Makinde inaugurates Olubadan as chairman Oyo State Council of Obas. Lastly, on the cover of Daily Sun newspaper, federal government not charging VAT on banking services, coming from NRS. Federal government not charging VAT on banking services. Perhaps the NRS needs to take this message to bank chieftains, because they are still charging. Just recently actually went to Zenith Bank, one of the banks yesterday, and she was charged VAT. It was clearly stated on that. Federal government not charging VAT on banking services. It's on that note we conclude the review of Daily Sun newspaper this Friday. For more, log into the website of Daily Sun newspaper. From Daily Sun, we move to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is Vanguard. Vanguard's leading story says 152 trillion naira debt driven by forest rates adjustment reforms, coming from Finance Minister. Says 30 trillion naira ways and means now recognized. Insists debt rise driven by forest revaluation, not fresh borrowing. 2025 deficit at 3.4% of GDP shows fiscal resilience. Experts react. Kickers to that leading story on today's Vanguard. 152 trillion naira debt driven by forest waste adjustment reforms, to the Finance Minister. The gun hegemony, how military incursion arrested Nigeria's growth. Ayanku, Amuka, Okpadokun, others seek urgent return to plural federal constitution. Tinubu, Sanwo-Olu, Oshoba, others felt Okpadokun. And we also have the picture of the Armed Forces Remembrance Day with Vice President flanked by others, including the service chiefs at yesterday's celebration. Atop the masthead of Vanguard 2026 budget, ministry votes over 500 million naira for makeup artists, hairdressers, grinding machines. That story continues on page 9 of Vanguard. 2026 budget, ministry votes over 500 million naira for makeup artists, hairdressers, grinding machines. Rivers Assembly fails to resume amid impeachment saga. Armed Forces Remembrance Day, Tinubu, Shettima, governors, others pay tribute to fallen heroes. Abducted doctor in Edo regains freedom after 50 million naira ransom. And that concludes the review of front headline stories on Vanguard this Friday. For more, log into the website of Vanguard newspaper. We head up to the next paper we have on our lineup this Friday, and that is Blueprint. Blueprint's leading story says Nigeria's GDP heading towards 5.5% growth in 2026, coming from NESG. Improved macroeconomic stability fragile. Country cannot afford to pause. We are entering consolidation phase, coming from the finance minister, Edu. EU removes nation from high-risk financial list. We also have the picture of the armed forces, like I mentioned earlier, with Vice President Kashim Shettima placing whip at 4 to commemorate the day. Tinubu, Fubara, Umba, Makinde, others honor fallen heroes. 7 troops. FG Legion plan affordable housing for veterans. Court orders interim forfeiture of $150,000 linked to Vertify Global boss. Alafin absent as Makinde inaugurates Ladoja chairman Oyo Council of Obas. Analysts warn of higher cost as banks add 7.5% VAT on transfers. And we have a contradicting story on Daily Sun, where NROC said the federal government is not charging VAT on banking services. However, on the cover of Blueprint newspapers, analysts warn of higher costs as banks add 7.5% VAT on transfers, which is what they are doing already. Dangote splashes 15 billion naira on cement distributors at awards night. And defamation, federal government strikes out criminal charges against Natasha. Towards the masthead of Blueprint, new tax regime will boost disposable income, cut cost of living, Oyedele. And business news, Nigeria's oil and gas sector to attract over $30 billion investment by 2030, experts. Lastly, on the cover of Blueprint, NFF will decide my future with Super Eagles, coming from the coach, Chell. NFF will decide my future with Super Eagles, Chell. And that also brings to a close the review of front headline stories on Blueprint's newspaper this Friday. For more, log into the website of Blueprint. We head up to the last paper we have on our lineup this Friday, and that is The Guardian. The Guardian's big stories leading the page today: how 300% cost spike, drug rationing turned diabetes to death threat. How 300% cost spike, drug rationing turned diabetes to death threat. Big story, and the story continues on page 4 and 5 of the paper. However, we have illustration as usual beneath the big story. Diabetes contribute to over 3.4 million deaths yearly, with more than half of the population without access to medication. International Diabetes Federation (IDF) projects the epidemic to reach 853 million by 2050. 75% of diabetes sufferers live in low and middle income countries. Over 11.4 million Nigerians are diagnosed battling diabetes. Only a third of those diagnosed receive proper treatment. 34.5% of patients with diabetic foot ulcers lose legs in Nigeria compared to 0.1% overseas. Diabetes kills about 30,000 to 40,000 Nigerians yearly. Cost of medication spiked between 300 to 500% in 3 years. And that also brings to these are illustrations beneath the leading story, big story actually, on the cover of The Guardian this Friday. How 300% cost spike, drug rationing turned diabetics to death threat. Still on the cover of The Guardian, and forces resolute against terrorism, says CDS amid posers about Tinubu's absence. NESG projects 5.5% growth, 16% inflation in 2026, once against policy reversals. U.S. sanctions, foreign airlines battle drop in passenger traffic. Fubara's impeachment stalls as lawmakers fail to reconvene. Federal government ASUD promises improved post-service welfare for academic staff. Article Son dumps PDP for APC, backs Tinubu's second term. And that also takes us to the stories just beneath the masthead of The Guardian. Kano governor, deputy pathways over defection. Alleged 110.4 billion naira fraud. EFCC tenders fresh bank records against the Aya Bello, the former governor of Kogi State, orders. More banks meet recapitalization threshold as tally exceeds 20. And that also concludes review of front headline stories on The Guardian this Friday. Don't forget to log into the website of The Guardian for continuation of these headline stories, www.guardian.ng. Well, viewers, that's also where we draw the curtain on this Friday's edition of Inside Nigeria. For more, don't forget to follow us on all our social media handles for more news and news on the hour. My name is Winifred Weber. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the last word. Thank you for watching. For sponsorship